Okay. I'll report first because we're from Group A, so just follow the alphabet as we have been. We had some interesting discussions about, since we started at mostly at the beginning of the survey, the idea of to what extent we should really be going into the various kinds of B data. And so it was a bit of a interesting discussion about how granular should we get in this versus just wanting to be able to collect as much information as we possibly can. So yeah, it can be a bit of a difficult distinction in terms of trying to say that everything is data, at which point we might be coming up with advice for people that really, really don't actually have what could be considered data. At the same time, we also had some good discussions about anything that's digital and that could be lost and harm a person's career is probably something that is worth being managed, ideally through a data management plan. So we have some useful things to think about in how we want to represent that. And in the end, I think we do want to just make sure that we have questions that gather as much information as possible. Anything else, Daniela, that I missed that you might want to mention?
This was everything.
Okay. Group B, do you want to give your summary?
Happy to. Thanks, Jessica. So in our session, we talked about how at the moment the questions are kind of tailored for researchers, and so some ways to kind of alleviate this would maybe do branched questions by role for things such as data librarians, repository managers, and funders, for instance. We talked about how it can be difficult to send a broad-based survey to researchers with various backgrounds who might not understand the question, make it difficult to interpret. And so some solutions for that could be focus groups or interviews or adding definitions, but this can make the survey somewhat heavy. We also got into specific questions in our sections and ways to improve their understanding and get at specific responses for the disciplines and differences and distinctions there. And trying to make sure I get everything. Vaughn, was there anything I missed? But we also talked about the idea of the different sections might not be understood, what we mean by those different time periods in the research process. And so having section headers defining what part of the research process we're asking about. Yvonne or anyone else in the group, is there anything else that I missed?
No, I don't think so at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll pass it to Group C, Breakout C.
Thank you. So that was. Oops, let me turn my video on instead of, because I don't have a fun avatar. So Group C. So we started on the. Let me pull it up. We started on the active data storage and backup, and a lot of what we talked about was, I almost want to call it semantics. In terms of making sure that we're being very clear about what exactly we're talking about within the questions. So, with research data being most important, that might not be, the clearest, because someone could say like, well, everything is kind of important, as opposed to what kind of data do you back up or create that you can't replace versus things that, like, hypothetically you could go back and recreate if you needed to. And so, also then thinking about the different things that we're calling things like storage solutions versus repositories versus data publishing versus making your data publicly available. And so how in that particular section, you go through and we kind of, to someone who has not seen the survey before, it kind of seems like you're asking about a couple of different things all within one question, as opposed to maybe breaking some out, asking specifically about just making data publicly available versus long-term storage, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're allowing access to the data. And so talking about what might be some ways to make that clearer to respondents. One great idea that came up was potentially including a sort of guide on the side, because one of the things that can be really difficult when talking to researchers in different disciplines is jargon. And so, you know, we might know what a repository is, or someone in a discipline that regularly puts data in a repository might know, but how can someone who's never had to use a repository totally understand what that means? If, you know, how do they know that they don't know, I guess, what a repository is, unless we're telling them, giving them maybe some additional guidance to kind of say, like, hey, this is what we mean when we say a repository. Another point that someone brought up was the addition of possibly adding more other sections with options for free response, so as not to alienate the researchers who might come in and be like, oh, well, they're not talking about my data type, this does not apply to me. And also, within the guidelines and in other places, perhaps giving people the option or ability to share links to guidance and documentation that they might use. So a little bit more of them also being able to give richer answers by kind of adding that sort of thing. Yeah, and if anybody else that was in my group wants to chime in on something that I might have missed, but other than that, I think that's we touched on kind of like a couple of different things. So I think that's kind of hit the major highlights. And so then we can go on to Group D.
Hey everybody. We in Group D, we went through the guidelines, principles, and best practices section of the survey. So questions 21 through 25, and the feedback received was wide ranging on different topics, but also a little bit of feedback on the whole of the survey as well. Some of the first feedback instances was to clarify some of the terms used. For example, data share. 21, we talk about RDM, but then we talk about restrictions. So clarify what that specifically means. Confusion between terms like data publishing and data sharing, so that those are clear as well. There was also discussions about mentioning metadata standards, and whether the topic is about the concept of metadata standards itself or within discipline-specific questions. There were also general questions that came up. For example, there was a request for adding questions on data volume. There was also strong request for adding sections on licensing and general IPR for different domains and things like that. There were, let me quickly look through. There are also questions about having, for example, are we interested in using having learning resources and other resources used by researchers within the guidelines and principles? Are we looking to get that information as well? There was also discussion about whether having it be following, for example, the Science Europe guidelines. They were the domain specific is along the methodology, and here we are looking at a discipline, whether there should be some more focus on that and the domain data protocols. Along with it, we also had some discussion on data types versus domain-specific questions. I think that mostly covers it. Yasmin, please chip in if I've missed something. Okay. Oh, yeah.
And I will just, we just want to ask you a couple more questions, then we finalize the discussion. So sorry that we keep picking on your brains, but we really appreciate all the input you're sharing with us. So I will ask you to go one more time to menti.com, and I will start sharing my screen just in a second, but I will also put it in the chat. Yes, one moment, please. All right, so I believe that you are seeing my screen one more time on mentimeter.com. Sorry, I thought I put the link. Oh yeah, I did. Okay, that's great. So if you don't see my screen, can someone say it? Or if you are seeing it, sorry, I reformulated. If you're seeing it, can you? Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. Okay, yeah, so we just want to ask you, do you have, yeah, we had a breakout session. You could have the chance, of course, to discuss about only one part of the survey. So is there anything you couldn't talk about during this session and you still would like to share with us? You can just write it in 3 words. You can write a full sentence, anything. Okay, that's great. That's good to hear. That's the good conversation. Consider sharing core survey results. Yeah, definitely standards for DMP guidance. Yeah, a very good one indeed. Thank you very much. We also hope it works out well. Thank you. When do you think it will be released? Actually, we have this written down, but can one of my colleagues answer this question? I don't know it at the top of my head at the moment. So when the survey is going to be released? Yes, what's the plan of distributing the survey, or that's in the next steps maybe? It might be good to have a glossary with the main elements to make sure. Yes, thank you very much. That's, I think, a really good point. And it was indeed discussed multiple times. Yeah, so my colleague is also going to talk a little bit more in the next steps, actually. And if there's still anything missing, of course, you can put your question in the chat. All right, so time-wise, I will start moving on to the next question, but we are anytime interested and open to the feedback. I just see a question in the chat, but I didn't fully understand. Oh, okay, thank you, Shannon. Okay, I'm continuing to the next question. So we already have some communities in mind, mailing lists in mind in terms of sharing the survey, but any input is very much valuable. So if you know, if you have in mind certain communities, certain mailing lists that we should definitely send the survey to, if you can share it with us, just write it in this question. We will really appreciate it a lot. I can also imagine maybe you don't know from the top of your head at the moment. If that's the case, of course, it's okay. All right, so perhaps you might need more time for this. That's no problem, of course. Okay, some coming. Institution mailing lists, yeah. And if you know any specific one, you can, of course, also share it afterwards. Yeah, are they member organizations? Definitely. What is ESFRI? You can turn on your mic. You can put it in the chat. I honestly don't know what is ESFRI.
It's European Research Infrastructures. I can't remember exactly what each of those are. The E is European, the RI is Research Infrastructures. I'm sure somebody else can jump in. And so there's a bunch of projects funded under that, focusing on, again, they're discipline focused.
Thank you so much. No, this is really appreciated. Oh, wow, that's full group link even. That's great. Thank you very much. Yeah, we indeed have quite a bit of this that are already here, but there's also quite some others that actually we didn't know yet. So this is really useful. Thank you so much for sharing. Actually, this is really valuable to know. All right, so just time-wise, I will continue, but we really appreciate your input here. Yeah, they're really great ones. Thank you. Yes. Okay, so we didn't talk much about it today, but in our previous presentation, we talked more, and also in our case statement, you can see. So mainly this whole project has been started for this following disciplines, the behavioral education and social sciences, as well as engineering and natural science and life sciences. But do you think we are missing? And do you think there is something which is not listed in this group and we should definitely include for this group, for this working group? Law, humanities, astronomy. Yeah, so it's also perhaps a little bit the naming we have, because of course we are not necessarily excluding astronomy when we are talking of engineering and natural sciences, but it's really good to also get this, yeah, arts, a very good one indeed. More granular, so you would like to see more specific disciplines. Yeah. It's good to see the arts is coming twice, linguistics. Yeah, just again, maybe we tried to be more common, but we couldn't cover exactly with the name. Using large infrastructure, okay. And that's also a good point. That's quite, of course, interesting to know. Heritage, yeah. Yeah, so we did with the medical science, actually, we do kind of cover it under life sciences. But again, I see from this comments also maybe the naming is not clear enough what specific disciplines we are talking about. But it's really good to know. Thank you very much for your input. Okay, time-wise, I will continue, but this is really useful. This is maybe a little bit difficult question at the moment, but this is also food for thought, also for our group. What type of format do you think the guidance should be? So things we have, obviously you need the content, but we have, it can be provided to funders. It could be shared with DMP2 providers that they can add. But it also could be just anyone can make use of, just download it, integrate into their materials. But do you have any specific suggestions on this? I think we will pick your brains more actually for this in the coming time. Ask this in survey, that's a good one. But do add image and infographics. Yeah, that's true, that always helps. An online interactive tool. Yeah, that's actually a very good idea. Maybe also a bit like a decision tree or something. Yeah, then that comment just came. Thank you. Oh, this is really cool. Knowledge graphs, yeah, similar to the machine actionable DMP documentation. That's great, actually. A toolkit that can be filtered. So that's online and open with templates, talking with stakeholders. Yeah, definitely talking with stakeholders to see what format is the most useful one. Well, thank you so much, actually. This is very useful input. Just time-wise, I will continue, but I believe we will come back to you for this again. I think this is our last question. So is there anything that you want to still share regarding this group, but you didn't have a chance today because we also heavily focused on the survey, but maybe you still have a question or you have a specific opinion or feedback that you would like to share with us? Just again, just in a few words, or could be like a sentence. You can also, if there's anything remaining question, you can also put that, of course. Or you can also turn on your mic in the last couple of minutes. No, thank you. No, thanks for joining us. Okay. Yeah, that's a very good idea too with the researchers, disciplinary working groups. Thank you for that. Yeah, specific roles. There's a lot of very good feedback. Thank you so much. I didn't notice that I'm stealing from my colleagues' time. Now I will stop sharing. Thank you so much for all the feedback. Really much appreciated.